November the 13th, 2018. Because you're looking at a chart. It's called a Holocene Temperature Variation Chart. And it goes back about 12,000 years. If you notice in the top left, it says end of the last glacial period. Now, this video is about a rapid global cooling that's coming upon this planet. And it could end up being very serious starting this year. Many of you have made comments already that it's colder across the U.S. than it should be in November, and I agree with you. But again, this goes back 12,000 years. And guys, I know there's been at least a half a dozen videos I've done in the last 6 or 7 years talking about 12,000 years ago. Remember the article that we covered about the Carolina Bays, how they formed about 12,000 years ago. This ended the age of the woolly mammoths and things like that, guys. But anyway, we're talking about global cooling, mini ice age, and severe cold weather coming. It could happen within months, according to some of the information coming from Dr. Tony Phillips and others at NASA now. But this one is from an article from iceagenow.info. Check out their website. But think about this. Look at the chart. You see the era since that time, 12,000 years ago. Right after that, about 8,000 years ago, we saw a heat spike. But then it started going back down, and it's continued to go down. This chart goes up to 2004, and you got a recent proxy chart at the top. But guys, it's just the trend of going back and eventually seeing major ice sheets on the North American, possibly South American continents. The ice sheets in New York at one time, guys, were over 400 feet thick in areas, some much thicker than that. Think of that. Think of that. Now, let's go back about 6 or so weeks. September 27th, Dr. Tony Phillips. Many of you have heard of him. He operates the website Space Weather that we have relied on for years and years. He's worked with NASA. Says the sun is entering one of the deepest solar minimum of the space age. Now, that's current time, right? But remember that chart that goes back 12,000 years. It says sunspots have been absent for most of 2018. We've reported on very few. And here we are in the 11th month. And the sun's ultraviolet output has sharply dropped. New research shows the Earth's upper atmosphere is responding. We see a cooling trend. This is from Martin Milazak of NASA's Langley Research Center. High above Earth's surface, near the edge of space, our atmosphere is losing heat energy. If current trends continue, it could soon set a space age record for cold. Now, this is a graphic of time. It's a satellite monitoring the temperature of the upper atmosphere. Guys, that's the thermosphere, thermal for heat. These results come from the SABRE instrument aboard NASA's TIME satellite. SABRE monitors infrared emissions from carbon dioxide, CO2, and nitric oxide, two substances that play a key role in the energy balance of air 100 to 300 kilometers above our planet's surface. By measuring the infrared glow of these molecules, SABRE can assess the thermal state of gas at the very top of the atmosphere, a layer that, again, we call the thermosphere. In other words, using an infrared camera, you're looking at CO2 and especially nitric oxide molecules. They appear in infrared. Why? Because they are heat molecules. They rise, they expand, but the atmosphere is getting thinner because of the loss of this heat. And he says the thermosphere, that top layer, always cools off during solar minimum. It's one of the most important ways the solar cycle affects our planet. I agree, guys. Everywhere from climate chaos with the hurricanes, with the weather shifting, getting colder or hotter. And you say, well, wait a minute, BP, if we're getting cooler, why is the sunburn so intense in the summer? Many of you already know the answer to that. Because our shields are weak, our atmosphere is thinner, more space radiation, gamma radiation, penetrate. You can burn very bad on a cool day, okay? But the planet's going into global cooling, and it is happening much faster than what they expected. It says when the thermosphere cools, it shrinks, literally decreasing the radius of Earth's atmosphere. Of course it does. Any air shrinks when it's cool. This shrinkage decreases aerodynamic drag on satellites and low Earth orbit, extending the lifetime. He said that's the good news. Bad news, it also delays the natural decay of space junk, resulting in a more cluttered environment around the Earth. Also true. There's too much of that. But this rapid cooling, guys, they're saying it could happen. We could reach that space age low before January 1st, 2019, within 6 weeks or so. And you're seeing it. I've seen comments, again, in the videos about BP. It's way too cool for November, where we're at. And I agree. It continues, it says, to help keep track of what's happening in the thermosphere, Milenzak and colleagues recently introduced the Thermosphere Climate Index, or TCI, a number expressed in watts, just like energy, that tells us how much heat or nitrous oxide molecules are dumping into space. During solar maximum, TCI is high or hot. During solar minimum, it's low, it's cold. Right now, it is very low, said Milenzak. Sabre is currently measuring 33 billion watts of infrared power from nitric oxide. That's 10 times smaller than we see during more active phases of the solar cycle. Although Sabre has been in orbit for only 17 years, Milenzak and colleagues recently calculated TCI, or the Thermosphere Climate Index, back to the 1940s. I'll show you the chart. Sabre taught us to do this by revealing how TCI depends on other variables such as geomagnetic activity and the sun's ultraviolet output, things that have been measured for decades. Now, this is the TCI chart they're talking about. Again, noticing the far left side, power is in watts. It says a historical record of the Thermosphere Climate Index. Milenzak and colleagues recently published the paper showing the state of the thermosphere, and they discussed using a set of 5 plain language terms: cold, cool, neutral, warm, and hot. That's how they've done it. And you can see this in the different colored lines on the graph: cold, up to warm, up to hot. Now, since around 1958-59, it has been a steady decrease. But we don't see back past this, because this is how far the model went back, probably around 75 years or so. But if you looked at the glacial chart that we went back and looked at for 12,000 years, you can see this is just part of the decline. It matches sunspot activity. Remember, a normal solar cycle, guys, is about 11.8 years. You have it rise and then you have it fall. But we're going into grand solar minimum, and it could be one of the game changers. You go back 12,000 years, we're still seeing a decrease, especially after 8,000 years ago with that heat peak. Think about history in this time. Think about it, both biblically, historically, scientifically, any way you want to look at it. Think about the time we're talking about. Now, it's decreasing. You're seeing it here from 2000 to 2020 or to 2018. We're almost at 2019 here, that we've not even been in the power as far as watts in the warm area. See that? Only once in the hot area, back around, again, 59, 58. So all of this is decreasing. It's matching. Now, one of the things, and that I hope that now that they're looking at this, they will include their scientific analysis. I'm speaking to Mr. Milenzak and Dr. Tony Phillips. Include the sun's binary twin. Why? Because it also has a cycle of 11.8 years as it orbits the sun. Remember, the orbit is not a perfect circle. In that 11.8 years, half of it, Jupiter is getting further away from the sun. The other half is coming back closer. And again, the sun is closer to one point of the orbit of Jupiter. Jupiter does not orbit our sun. They orbit a point outside the sun because they are binary twins. The ancients called it Nibiru. Anyway, include the magnetic effects. Look at the phenomenon called the Jupiter wind and magnetic solar wind stream reversals in our magnetopause. Jupiter has a lot to do with this cycle. And so when you look at going for thousands of years back and looking at the continued drop in solar activity, is the orbit of Jupiter also slightly varying because of that? Getting a little further away when it comes to its closest approach to the sun, and further away from the Earth. But again, the solar minimums, the solar cycles, 11.8 years, are tied to Jupiter. That will come into play, guys, in the science, I hope, in the next few years. We will see. But they're saying, let me continue this, as 2018 comes to an end, the Thermosphere Climate Index is on the verge of setting a space-age record for cold. We're not quite there yet, says Milazak, but it could happen in a matter of months. We are especially pleased that SABRE is gathering information so important for tracking the effect of the sun on our atmosphere. This is from James Russell, SABRE's principal investigator at Hampton University. A more than 16-year record of long-term changes in the thermal conditions of the atmosphere more than 70 miles above the surface is something we did not expect for an instrument designed to last only 3 years in orbit. But what did they say? The atmosphere being thinner, smaller, less drag. Soon the Thermosphere Climate Index will be added to spaceweather.com as a regular data feed so our readers can monitor the state of the upper atmosphere just as researchers do. And again, that's Dr. Tony Phillips' site, at spaceweather.com. It's always been linked on both of our websites. Check that out, and you can see, and we'll take a quick look. Again, it's linked on both websites, BPEarthWatch.com and at BPHeadlineNews.com. But let me pull this up a little. The current conditions, we have some elevated solar wind speed because of the coronal opening in the surface of the sun. Very faint sunspot, 27, 26, almost unnoticeable. Just hasn't happened. But we do have elevated solar wind speed. We've seen a couple of unusual quakes because when our shields are weak, you have an increased solar stream because of an opening. It's temporary. Then things happen. Quakes happen. The energy is transferred into the core of the Earth. CERN eats it up. They love it. We can match quakes. We can match, and we've been doing it for years, with peaks that match CERN's energy peaks, match solar wind speed peaks, because that energy is fed via the magnetic lines of force into what's called ground currents. Look it up. Look up Hall currents. But they're also mentioning here that they found a new bright comet. Check this out. Just this new comet last week was discovered by 3 amateur astronomers, 1 in Arizona, 2 in Japan. We'll do another video on that. But this is where they're going to start putting the TCI index. One other thing they do here, they've got 2 locations, mostly in California, but sometimes they'll go over to the East Coast and launch these weather balloons. Again, this is some of the students of Dr. Tony Phillips, I think, at Space Weather, but they'll launch the balloons and it measures stratospheric radiation going back from March 2015 until July of this year. 18% increase. Guys, do you know what that does to people that fly a lot on airplanes? Do you understand why with weak shields, this increase in radiation gives you the sunburns, plants wither, increased strength in hurricanes because of the heating of the air and the depth of the heating in the oceans? All of that you would think would calm down, but it doesn't. The shields are a balance of weather. You're going to have extremes to both sides when they are weak. But most of the U.S. now is experiencing cooler weather than we normally have this time of the year. It feels more like early January than it does November. It just went from being very hot to cool, wet, and damp. We're going to be here. Now, I'm central Mississippi. Think about this. Below freezing for the next few nights. And not warming up above 40s and 50s in the daytime. Again, January weather. But we're watching it, guys. Watch for updates. Don't forget to check out our new website called headlinenews.com. We update the news throughout the day and evening there on the articles, the videos. There's a chat room with people bringing in information. Very informative. But guys, we're watching it again. You watch it. It's a heads up. Be safe.